Baltimore Memorial Hospital buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Nurses rushed between rooms, doctors barked orders, and the smell of disinfectant hung in the air. In the middle of it all, Zariah Mills checked a patient's IV with steady hands that never seemed to shake, no matter how hectic things got. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Peterson?" Zariah asked, her voice warm as she adjusted the elderly woman's pillow. "Better now that you're here, honey," Mrs. Peterson replied, patting Zariah's hand. "You're the only one who remembers I like my water with no ice." Zariah smiled. It was the little things that mattered in a place where people felt like numbers. She'd been a nurse at Baltimore Memorial for 7 years now, and while other staff came and went, she remained a constant. The patients noticed. The administration, not so much. "Nurse Mills!" Dr. Bradley's sharp voice cut through the moment. "We need you in room 412. Now, not tomorrow." Zariah straightened her scrubs. "I'll be back to check on you before lunch," she promised Mrs. Peterson, before hurrying down the hall. At the nurse's station, her friend Tanya rolled her eyes. "Bradley's on a power trip again. Some big-shot surgeon is visiting from Johns Hopkins, so everyone's showing off." "Just another day," Zariah said, grabbing the chart for room 412. The truth was, Zariah didn't mind the work. What she minded was going home to an empty apartment night after night, eating dinner alone while watching reruns of medical dramas that got everything wrong. 3 years ago, she'd thought Marcus was the one, until she found out she was just convenient. A nurse with flexible hours who could work around his schedule, who didn't demand too much attention, who was always understanding when he cancelled plans. The breakup left her with more than just a broken heart. It left her with walls built so high that even her closest friends couldn't see over them. "You going to Tanya's birthday thing on Friday?" asked Keisha, another nurse, as they restocked supplies. "Got an extra shift," Zariah replied automatically. Keisha sighed. "Girl, you always have an extra shift. The hospital won't fall apart without you for one night." "Maybe next time," Zariah said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At the end of her 12-hour shift, Zariah's feet ached as she trudged to her locker. All she wanted was a hot shower and her bed. She spun the combination lock and pulled open the metal door. A folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Frowning, she picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive-looking. Zariah unfolded it carefully, revealing handwriting that flowed across the page like water. "Your hands heal more than bodies. They heal hearts just by being gentle in a place where gentleness is rare. Thank you for being the light in these sterile halls." Zariah read it twice, then checked the back of the paper. Nothing. No signature. No name. She looked around the empty locker room, feeling suddenly exposed as if someone was watching her. "What is this?" she muttered, tucking the note into her purse. She tried to forget about it on the drive home, but the words kept repeating in her head. Who would leave something like that? And why not sign it? The next day, Zariah found herself scanning faces as she walked through the hospital. Was it Dr. Walker, who always seemed to find reasons to consult with her? Or maybe Michael from radiology, who brought her coffee sometimes? She was still distracted when she entered a patient's room for a routine check and almost bumped into a tall figure in a white coat. "Excuse me," she said automatically, stepping back. "No need. I was just leaving." The voice was deep, with the kind of authority that only came from years of being listened to without question. Zariah looked up to find herself staring into the cool grey eyes of Dr. Elias Ward. The newest addition to the surgical staff, Dr. Ward had a reputation that preceded him. Harvard Medical School, groundbreaking research, and an attitude as cold as the surgical instruments he wielded. He was handsome in that untouchable way. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples, despite being only in his early 30s. The kind of man whose family probably had a wing of the hospital named after them. "Nurse?" He glanced at her ID badge. "Mills, this patient's post-op vitals are concerning. I've ordered additional monitoring." "Yes, doctor," Zariah replied, meeting his gaze directly. She wasn't one to be intimidated, even by surgeons who looked like they stepped out of a medical drama. "I was just about to check his incision site. There's been some discharge." Something flickered across Dr. Ward's face. Surprise, maybe, before his expression returned to its usual mask of professional detachment. "Good catch. Keep me updated." He brushed past her, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Later that afternoon, Zariah was checking a patient's chart when she noticed a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. Her heart skipped as she recognized the same thick paper from yesterday. She quickly slipped it into her pocket, waiting until she was alone in the supply closet to read it. In a world where everyone is rushing, You take the time to see people, really see them. Your patience isn't weakness, it's your superpower. Again, no signature. Zariah leaned against the shelves, a mixture of flattery and unease washing over her. The words were beautiful, touching something deep inside her that she thought she'd buried after Marcus. But the mystery writer was clearly someone who worked at the hospital, someone who watched her. "Everything okay in here?" Tanya's voice made Zariah jump. She quickly stuffed the note back in her pocket. "Just looking for extra compression bandages," Zariah said, grabbing a package from the shelf. "Well, hurry up. The ER just called. Bus accident, multiple traumas coming in, all hands on deck." The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos as ambulances arrived one after another. Zariah moved from patient to patient, starting IVs, assisting with assessments, her training taking over as she worked alongside doctors to stabilize the most critical cases. She was helping move a patient to radiology when Dr. Ward appeared, his surgical mask hanging around his neck. His scrubs were splattered with blood, but his hands were perfectly steady as he reached for the patient chart. "This one's going straight to the OR," he said, scanning the vitals. "Ruptured spleen, possible internal bleeding. BP's dropping," Zariah reported, adjusting the IV drip. "I've increased the fluids, but he's still showing signs of shock." Dr. Ward looked at her for a long moment. "You'll assist me in surgery." It wasn't a question, but Zariah still felt compelled to respond. "Doctor, Walker usually—" "I want you," Dr. Ward cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're thorough. I need that right now." In the operating room, Zariah was surprised by how different Dr. Ward seemed. His reputation for being cold and demanding didn't disappear, but there was something else, a focus, a respect for the body under his hands that spoke of more than just technical skill. "Suction," he murmured, and Zariah responded immediately, clearing the field of vision. They worked in sync, as if they'd been doing this for years. When the patient's blood pressure suddenly plummeted, Dr. Ward didn't panic. His hands remained steady, his voice calm as he directed the team through the crisis. "Nurse Mills, what do you see?" he asked at one point, nodding toward a section of the exposed organs. Zariah blinked in surprise. Surgeons rarely asked nurses for their observations during procedures. "There's another bleeder just behind the pancreas," she said after a careful look. Dr. Ward nodded. "Good eye." He skillfully tied off the small vessel that might have been missed otherwise. 5 hours later, the patient was stable, and Zariah's back ached from standing in one position for so long. As they scrubbed out, she noticed Dr. Ward watching her in the mirror above the sink. "You're not what I expected," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "What did you expect, Doctor?" "Ward?" Zariah asked, too tired for games. "Less competence, more deference." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm glad to be wrong." Before Zariah could respond, another surgeon burst into the scrub room. "Ward, we've got another trauma coming in. Motorcycle versus truck. They're asking for you specifically." Dr. Ward dried his hands. "Get some rest, Nurse Mills. You've earned it." Then he was gone, back into the fray. Zariah finished her shift at 2 a.m., her body running on nothing but adrenaline and hospital coffee. The locker room was empty when she finally made it there, most of the day shift long gone and the night shift busy at their stations. She opened her locker, half expecting to find another note. There was nothing. Trying to ignore the twinge of disappointment, Zariah gathered her things. As she picked up her coffee mug to take home and wash, she noticed something tucked inside it. Another folded paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "Your hands were steady today when everything else was chaos. You saved a life today as surely as any surgeon. Remember that when you doubt your worth." Zariah sank onto the bench, the note clutched in her hand. Whoever was writing these had been in the OR with her today. They had seen her work with Dr. Ward. The pool of potential authors had just gotten a lot smaller. As if summoned by her thoughts, the locker room door opened and Dr. Ward walked in. He stopped short when he saw her. "Nurse Mills, I thought everyone from the day shift had gone home." Zariah quickly folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. "Just leaving, Doctor." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face a moment too long. "That was impressive work today. Thank you." She stood, gathering her bags. "You're not what I expected either." "Oh?" He raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely curious. "And what did you expect?" Zariah hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. Someone who wouldn't notice a nurse's contribution, someone who'd take all the credit. Dr. Ward's expression shifted, something vulnerable flashing across his face before disappearing again. There are many kinds of healing that happen in a hospital, Nurse Mills. Not all of them require a scalpel. The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with something Zariah couldn't quite identify. She nodded, suddenly eager to escape the intensity of his gaze. "Good night, Dr. Ward." "Good night, Zariah." The sound of her first name on his lips followed her all the way to the parking lot. At home, Zariah laid the 3 notes side by side on her kitchen table. She read them again, trying to find clues in the handwriting, in the choice of words. Could it be Dr. Ward? The timing of the 3rd note suggested it could be. But why would someone like him, privileged, brilliant from a different world, be interested in her? She remembered his eyes in the scrub room, the way they seemed to see past her scrubs and professional demeanor to something underneath, the way he'd asked for her observations during surgery, valuing her input when most surgeons treated nurses like glorified tool passers. Zariah shook her head. She was being ridiculous. Dr. Ward probably had socialites and fellow doctors throwing themselves at him. Why would he bother with secret notes when he could have anyone he wanted? Still, as she got ready for bed, she couldn't shake the image of his face, the moment of vulnerability she'd glimpsed. There was more to Dr. Elias Ward than his cold reputation suggested, much more, and despite all her walls, despite all her promises to herself after Marcus, Zariah couldn't deny the flutter of interest she felt. Whether Dr. Ward was her secret admirer or not, something had shifted between them today in that operating room, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of a connection. As she drifted off to sleep, Zariah told herself she was being foolish, that even if Dr. Ward was leaving the notes, nothing could come of it. They were from different worlds, different lives, but in her dreams she kept seeing his steady hands, hearing his voice when he said her name. And for the first time in 3 years, Zariah's heart didn't immediately reject the possibility of letting someone in. The notes kept coming. For 2 weeks, Zariah found them tucked into unexpected places. One was folded into the sleeve of her favorite coffee cup. Another was slipped between the pages of a patient file she was reviewing. Each one seemed to arrive just when her day was at its worst, like the writer somehow knew exactly when she needed encouragement. "Your smile this morning made a patient stop crying. Never underestimate the power you have. I watched you stay an hour after your shift to sit with the man in 302 because his family couldn't make it. That kind of compassion can't be taught." Zariah kept every note in a small box beside her bed. Sometimes, on particularly bad nights, she would read them all, one after another, letting the words wash over her like a warm blanket. "You seem different lately," Tanya commented as they ate lunch together in the hospital cafeteria. "Less, I don't know, closed off?" Zariah shrugged, pushing her salad around with her fork. "Just been sleeping better, I guess." Tanya said, clearly not believing her. "It wouldn't have anything to do with a certain tall, handsome surgeon who keeps finding reasons to be wherever you are?" Zariah's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, please. Doctor, Ice King himself, Elias Ward. I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and suddenly he's requesting you for all his surgeries? That's not a coincidence, honey. He just appreciates competence," Zariah said, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "It's professional respect, that's all." Tanya laughed. "Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. Just be careful, okay? Men like him, they don't usually cross the line with women like us. Not for anything serious." Zariah felt a flash of irritation. "Women like us? You know what I mean," Tanya said, lowering her voice. "He comes from money, family name on buildings kind of money. Those people stick to their own kind." Before Zariah could respond, her pager went off. "Got to go," she said, almost relieved for the interruption. "Dr. Ward's patient in 415 needs checking." Tanya gave her a knowing look. Of course it's his patient. As Zariah walked down the hall, she couldn't shake Tanya's words. Was Dr. Ward really seeking her out? And if he was, what did it mean? More importantly, was he the one leaving the notes? She pushed the thoughts aside as she entered room 415. Mrs. Garza was recovering from a complicated gallbladder removal, and her pain had been difficult to manage. "How are we feeling today?" Zariah asked, checking the IV line. "Like I've been run over by a truck," Mrs. Garza grimaced. "But better than yesterday. That doctor of yours has magic hands." "He's not my doctor," Zariah corrected automatically. Mrs. Garza smiled knowingly. "Could have fooled me. The way he was talking about you this morning during rounds, said you were the best nurse in the hospital. Said if anyone could make me comfortable, it would be you." Zariah tried to hide her surprise as she checked Mrs. Garza's vitals. Dr. Ward had complimented her? To a patient? "Well, let's see what we can do about that pain," she said, adjusting Mrs. Garza's medication. "Doctor, Ward left orders for an increased dose if needed." After making Mrs. Garza comfortable, Zariah headed to the nurse's station to update the chart. As she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with Dr. Ward himself. "Nurse Mills," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. His touch was warm through the thin fabric of her scrubs. "I was just looking for you. Mrs. Garza's pain is better controlled now," Zariah reported, trying to ignore how close he was standing. "I've increased her dosage as per your orders." "Good," he nodded. "But that's not why I was looking for you. I have a complicated case coming in tomorrow, a spinal reconstruction. I'd like you to scrub in." Zariah blinked in surprise. "Spinal reconstruction? That's usually handled by the neurosurgical team's nurses." "Yes, well, I've requested you specifically," he said, his grey eyes intense. "Unless you'd rather not." "No, I'd be happy to assist," Zariah said quickly. It's unusual." Something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I'm finding that unusual can be quite refreshing." He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, then turned to leave. "Surgery's scheduled for 10 a.m. Don't be late." Zariah stared after him, her heart beating a little too fast. What was happening here? Later that afternoon, Zariah was helping an elderly patient walk the halls when she noticed a group of doctors gathered at the end of the corridor. Dr. Ward was among them, along with the hospital's chief of surgery and several visiting physicians. As she and her patient slowly approached, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Remarkable technique, Ward," one of the visitors was saying. "Your father would be proud." Dr. Ward's expression remained neutral, but Zariah noticed how his jaw tightened at the mention of his father. "My techniques are my own," he said coldly. "I don't practice medicine to fulfill family legacies." The chief of surgery cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Elias comes from a long line of distinguished surgeons," he explained to the visitors. "His father pioneered several procedures we still use today." "Before drinking himself to death," Dr. Ward added bluntly, causing several of the doctors to shift awkwardly. Just then, he noticed Zariah and her patient approaching. His expression softened slightly. "Nurse Mills," he nodded. "Mr. Hanson, good to see you on your feet." "This angel won't let me lie in bed all day," the elderly man said, patting Zariah's hand affectionately. "Says I need to move if I want to dance at my granddaughter's wedding next month." "She's right," Dr. Ward said, his voice gentler than Zariah had ever heard it. "Nurse Mills usually is." The group of doctors looked between Zariah and Dr. Ward with barely concealed interest. Zariah felt her cheeks warm. "We should continue our lap, Mr. Hanson," she said, guiding her patient past the group. As they shuffled away, she could feel Dr. Ward's eyes following her down the hall. The next morning, Zariah arrived early for the spinal surgery. She was reviewing the patient's chart in the prep room when Dr. Ward walked in, already dressed in his surgical scrubs. "You're early," he commented, washing his hands at the sink. "Always for a surgery I've never assisted with before," she replied. "I've been studying the procedure." He turned to look at her, water dripping from his hands. "Why? Why what? Why did you become a nurse? With your intelligence and attention to detail, you could have been a surgeon yourself." The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before, not in that way. "I wanted to heal people, not just their bodies," she said honestly. "Surgeons fix what's broken. Nurses help put the whole person back together afterward." Dr. Ward stared at her for a long moment. "That's a perspective I hadn't considered." Before she could respond, the rest of the surgical team began filing in, and the moment was lost in the preparations for surgery. The operation lasted 7 hours. The patient's spine was severely damaged from a car accident, and the reconstruction was delicate, demanding work. Throughout it all, Dr. Ward was focused, precise, and surprisingly patient with his team. "Suction here, please, Nurse Mills," he would say, or, "What do you see in this section, Mills?" He actually listened to her observations, incorporating them into his work. By hour 5, when everyone was tired and tense, he remained steady, occasionally making dry jokes that broke the tension in the room. This was a side of Dr. Elias Ward that few people ever saw. In the operating room, his cold exterior melted away, revealing a man who was not only brilliant but also thoughtful and even kind in his own way. When they finally closed the patient, the relief in the room was palpable. The surgery had been successful against difficult odds. "Excellent work, everyone," Dr. Ward said, stepping back from the table. "Especially you, Nurse Mills. Your assistance was invaluable." In the scrub room afterward, it was just the two of them again. Zariah was exhausted but exhilarated. There was nothing quite like the feeling of a successful surgery, of knowing you'd helped save someone's mobility and possibly their life. "You were amazing in there," she said, unable to keep the admiration from her voice. Dr. Ward looked almost embarrassed by the compliment. "I had excellent support." "No, really," Zariah insisted. "The way you handled that bone fragment near the nerve cluster, I've never seen anything like it." He was quiet for a moment, scrubbing his hands with more force than necessary. "My mother was a nurse," he said finally, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. Zariah paused in her own scrubbing. "I didn't know that. Not many people do. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known, raised me alone after my father." He trailed off, then shook his head. "She died last year, worked until her hands gave out, quite literally. Arthritis so bad she couldn't hold a coffee cup at the end." The pain in his voice was raw, unexpected. Zariah found herself reaching out, touching his arm gently. "I'm sorry." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something passed between them, a current of understanding that made Zariah's breath catch. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "Not many people can keep up with me in surgery. Not many surgeons would want a nurse to try," she countered. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I'm not most surgeons." "No," Zariah agreed. "You're definitely not." The moment stretched between them, loaded with unspoken words. Then the door opened as another surgical team came in to prep, and the spell was broken. "I'll check on our patient in recovery," Dr. Ward said, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Good work today, Nurse Mills." That evening, Zariah was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open as she gathered her things from her locker. She wasn't surprised to find another note, this one tucked into her jacket pocket. "Today I watched your hands help save a life, but it's your heart that saves people every day, in ways medicine can't measure." She smiled, tracing the elegant handwriting with her finger. More and more she was convinced the notes were from Dr. Ward. The timing was too perfect, the observations too specific. But why the secrecy? Why not just ask her out like a normal person? Then again, there was nothing normal about their situation. He was a surgeon from a wealthy family. She was a nurse who'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood. Hospital gossip would be merciless. And after what he'd shared about his mother, perhaps he understood better than most how nurses were often overlooked, undervalued. Maybe the notes were his way of seeing her, truly seeing her, without the complications of their different positions getting in the way. As the weeks passed, Zariah found herself working with Dr. Ward more and more often. Each time she discovered something new about him, how he always checked on his most anxious patients himself, how he remembered small details about the nurses' lives, how his cold exterior melted away when he was focused on healing. The notes continued too, appearing just when she needed them most. "Your laugh in the hallway today was the only good thing in my day. They don't see how you fight for your patients when no one else will. I see it. I see you." But along with the notes and the growing connection between them came the whispers. Zariah first noticed them in the cafeteria, the way conversations would stop when she walked by, the speculative glances from other staff. "People are talking," Tanya warned her one day as they changed into their scrubs, "about you and Dr. Ward." "There's nothing to talk about," Zariah insisted, though her heart wasn't in the denial. "Tell that to Nurse Manager Jenkins. I overheard her talking to HR yesterday. Something about inappropriate workplace relationships and maintaining professional boundaries." Zariah froze. "That's ridiculous. Dr. Ward and I have a professional relationship. We work well together, that's all." Tanya gave her a sympathetic look. "You might believe that, but not everyone does. And you know how it goes. They'll question your professionalism, not his. It's always the woman who pays the price in these situations, especially when there's a power imbalance." Zariah knew Tanya was right, and it made her angry. She and Dr. Ward hadn't done anything wrong. They'd never even touched beyond the accidental brushes that happened in a busy hospital. Yet people were already assuming the worst, already preparing to judge her. That afternoon, Zariah was called into Nurse Manager Jenkins' office. Her stomach sank as she took a seat across from the stern-faced woman. "Nurse Mills, you've been with us for 7 years now," Jenkins began, shuffling some papers on her desk. "Your record has been exemplary." "Thank you," Zariah said cautiously, "which is why I'm concerned about recent developments." Jenkins looked up, her expression severe. "Several staff members have noticed your increasingly familiar relationship with Dr. Ward." Zariah felt her face flush with indignation. "Dr. Ward and I have a professional working relationship. He values my skills as a nurse, and I respect his expertise as a surgeon. Be that as it may, Jenkins continued, perception matters in a hospital environment. Patients and staff need to have complete confidence in the objectivity of their care team. Are you suggesting I can't do my job properly because I work well with a particular doctor? Zariah asked, struggling to keep her voice level. I'm suggesting that you consider the optics of the situation. Dr. Ward has requested you for an unusual number of procedures. You've been seen having private conversations. People talk, Nurse Mills. And has anyone spoken to Dr. Ward about this? Zariah couldn't help asking. Or is it just the nurse who gets called into the principal's office? Jenkins' lips thinned. Dr. Ward's conduct is not my concern. Yours is. Because he's a surgeon, and I'm just a nurse. The words came out before Zariah could stop them. Because he's not under my supervision, Jenkins replied coldly. Consider this a friendly warning, Nurse Mills. I'd hate to see your career derailed by poor choices. Zariah left the office seething. The unfairness of it burned in her chest. Nothing had even happened between her and Dr. Ward, yet she was already being judged, already being warned about poor choices, while he continued on, untouched by scandal. She was so upset that she didn't see Dr. Ward himself until she nearly ran into him in the hallway. Nurse Mills, are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I'm fine, she said stiffly, not meeting his eyes. You don't seem fine, he persisted. Has something happened? Zariah looked up at him then, at his handsome face creased with genuine worry, and felt a surge of complicated emotions. If he was leaving the notes, if he did have feelings for her, where could it possibly lead? A few stolen moments before reality came crashing back in, whispers that would follow her throughout her career. I just got a friendly warning from Nurse Manager Jenkins, she said quietly. Apparently, people are talking about us. Doctor, Ward's expression darkened. About us? What does that mean? It means that when a surgeon and a nurse spend time together, people assume things, and it's the nurse who gets called unprofessional. That's absurd, he said, anger flashing in his eyes. I'll speak to Jenkins immediately. No, Zariah said quickly. That would only make things worse. Confirm their suspicions. What suspicions? That I recognize exceptional nursing talent, that I prefer working with someone who anticipates needs instead of waiting to be told what to do. His indignation would have been sweet if it wasn't so naive. Dr. Ward, Elias, she said, using his first name for the first time. You know it's more than that. He stared at her, something vulnerable crossing his face. Is it? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Before Zariah could respond, her pager went off. I have to go, she said, grateful for the interruption. Patient in 310 needs me. Dr. Ward nodded, his expression unreadable. We'll continue this discussion later. But Zariah wasn't sure she wanted to continue it, wasn't sure where it could possibly lead except to more trouble. That night, for the first time in weeks, there was no note waiting in her locker. Zariah told herself she was relieved, that it was for the best. But as she drove home alone, the absence felt like a loss she wasn't prepared for. She tossed and turned all night, thinking about Dr. Ward, about Elias, and the way he looked at her when no one else was watching, about the notes that had made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years, about the unfairness of a world that would judge her for connections she hadn't even fully explored yet. By morning, she'd made a decision. If the notes continued, she would respond. She would force the writer, whether it was Elias or someone else, to step out of the shadows. Because Zariah Mills was tired of being the one who healed everyone else, but was never chosen, never protected. She was tired of being anyone's secret. The next morning, Zariah arrived at the hospital with determination in her step. If her secret admirer wanted to communicate through notes, then she would do the same. She'd prepared her response carefully, direct and honest, just like she was. When she opened her locker, she found another note waiting for her. I'm sorry if I've caused you trouble, that was never my intention. Your worth should be celebrated, not questioned. So he knew about her meeting with Nurse Manager Jenkins. That narrowed down the possibilities even further. Taking a deep breath, Zariah took out her own note and placed it in her locker in plain view. She would leave it there all day, giving the writer plenty of opportunity to find it. Her message was simple. If you see me, truly see me, then stop hiding or stop writing. Throughout her shift, Zariah found it hard to concentrate. Every time she passed by the locker room, she wondered if her note had been discovered yet. She caught herself watching Dr. Ward whenever they were in the same room, looking for any sign that he might be her mystery writer. During lunch, Tanya nudged her. Earth to Zariah. You've been staring at the same page in that chart for 5 minutes. Sorry, Zariah said, closing the file. Just tired. And it has nothing to do with a certain handsome doctor who keeps looking over here. Zariah's head snapped up. Sure enough, Dr. Ward was sitting across the cafeteria with a group of other doctors, but his eyes were fixed on her. When their gazes met, he didn't look away. There's nothing going on, Zariah insisted, though her racing heart told a different story. Well, something's about to go on, Tanya said, nodding toward the entrance. Look who just walked in. Zariah turned to see Nurse Manager Jenkins entering the cafeteria, her sharp eyes immediately landing on Zariah and Dr. Ward. The older woman's disapproving frown was unmistakable. I swear that woman has radar, Tanya muttered. Maybe you should cool things down for a while, Z, at least until the gossip dies down. There's nothing to cool down, Zariah said, but she stood up anyway. I need to check on Mr. Rodriguez anyway. His pain meds should be wearing off. As she left the cafeteria, she could feel 2 sets of eyes following her, Dr. Ward's and Nurse Jenkins. One gaze warmed her skin, the other made her shoulders tense. The afternoon dragged on with no sign that her note had been discovered. By the end of her shift, Zariah was a bundle of nerves. She approached her locker slowly, half afraid and half hopeful about what she might find. The note was gone. In its place was nothing. Disappointment washed over her. Had she been too direct? Had she scared him off? Or worse, had it not been Dr. Ward at all, but someone else entirely? For 3 days, there was nothing. No notes in her locker, no messages tucked into patient charts. Dr. Ward was polite but distant when they worked together, as if consciously maintaining a professional barrier between them. So you seem down, Keisha commented as they changed out of their scrubs at the end of another long shift. Everything okay? Zariah forced a smile. Just tired. It's been a rough week. The truth was more complicated. She missed the notes more than she wanted to admit. They had become a bright spot in her often difficult days, a reminder that someone saw beyond her scrubs to the woman underneath, and if that someone was Dr. Elias Ward, well, that possibility had taken root in her heart, despite all her efforts to uproot it. On the 4th day after her note disappeared, Zariah was halfway through her shift when chaos erupted. A 5-car pileup on the highway had sent multiple traumas to the ER, and every available staff member was called to help. Mills! The ER charge nurse shouted as Zariah rushed in. Bay 3, Dr. Ward needs assistance. Zariah hurried to the trauma bay, where Dr. Ward was already working on a young woman with multiple lacerations and what looked like internal bleeding. Pressure's dropping, he said, without looking up as Zariah entered. We need to get her to the OR now. Surgery's backed up, Zariah reported, immediately checking the IV and preparing to move the patient. Dr. Chen has 2 head traumas ahead of us. She won't last that long, Dr. Ward said grimly. We'll have to stabilize her here. I need an ultrasound and a central line kit. Zariah moved quickly, gathering the necessary equipment. There was no time for awkwardness or uncertainty now. They fell into their familiar rhythm, working together as if they'd been doing it for years. Bleeding in the abdomen, Dr. Ward confirmed, after checking the ultrasound. Likely splenic rupture. We need to control it temporarily until we can get her to the OR. Blood bank is sending 4 units, Zariah said, already 1 step ahead. For the next hour they fought to keep the young woman stable. Dr. Ward's hands were sure and steady as he placed a central line and administered medications. Zariah anticipated his needs before he could voice them, handing him instruments and adjusting the patient's position. BP's coming up, she reported finally. 76/42. Not great, but better, Dr. Ward said, a hint of relief in his voice. He looked up at Zariah for the first time since she'd entered the trauma bay. Good work. Their eyes met over their surgical masks, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their professional roles. The moment was broken by the arrival of an OR nurse. Dr. Ward, OR 2 is ready for your patient. As they prepared to transfer the patient, Zariah felt Dr. Ward's hand briefly touch her arm. I want you in there with me, he said quietly. Dr. Walker is the usual... I want you, he repeated, his grey eyes intense. No one else. The surgery was long and difficult. The young woman's spleen was beyond saving, and there was damage to surrounding blood vessels that required delicate repair. Throughout it all, Zariah and Dr. Ward worked in sync, their earlier awkwardness forgotten in the shared purpose of saving a life. It was nearly midnight by the time they closed the patient. The rest of the surgical team filed out, leaving Zariah and Dr. Ward alone in the scrub room. "She'll make it," he said as he washed his hands. "Thanks to you." "I just assisted," Zariah said modestly. "You did the hard part." Dr. Ward turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. "You did more than assist. You kept me focused when I started to fatigue. You anticipated problems before they happened." He paused, his expression softening. "You're remarkable, Zariah Mills." The use of her full name sent a shiver down her spine. "Thank you," she said quietly. Silence stretched between them, loaded with unspoken words. Finally, Dr. Ward reached for a paper towel, drying his hands with careful deliberation. "I got your note," he said at last, not meeting her eyes. Zariah's heart skipped a beat. "My note, the one you left in your locker. If you see me, truly see me, then stop hiding. Or stop writing." Zariah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "It was you," she whispered. "All this time, it was you writing the notes." Dr. Ward, Elias, finally looked up, vulnerability plain on his face. "Yes." "Why?" The question came out more breathless than she intended. "Why not just talk to me?" "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me," he said simply. Dr. Elias Ward, showing interest in a nurse. Everyone would assume it was something else, something less than what it is. "And what is it?" Zariah asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the hospital around them. Elias took a step closer to her. "It's me seeing you, Zariah, really seeing you, not just as a nurse, but as a woman with more compassion and strength than anyone I've ever known." Zariah swallowed hard. "Why stop writing then, after I left my note?" "Because you asked me to choose. Stop hiding or stop writing. I couldn't bring myself to do either at first." His voice dropped lower. "I was afraid." "You? Afraid?" The concept seemed impossible. Dr. Elias Ward, afraid of anything? "Terrified," he admitted with a small, self-deprecating smile. "What if you were disappointed when you found out it was me? What if all the gossip made things impossible for you here? What if I already knew it was you?" Zariah interrupted softly. "What if I hoped it was you?" Elias stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "You hoped? The things you wrote? They saw past my walls, past the professional face I show everyone else." Zariah took a deep breath. "No one's ever really seen me like that before. I see you," he said simply. "I've been watching you for months. The way you care for patients, the way you stand up for what's right, the way you push through exhaustion to make sure everyone else is taken care of." He hesitated, then added, "The way you never seem to realize how extraordinary you are." Zariah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You could have any woman you wanted, someone from your world with your background." "I don't want my world," Elias said firmly. "My world is cold and calculating and cares more about appearances than substance." His voice softened. "I want your world, Zariah, a world where people matter more than prestige, where compassion isn't seen as weakness." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "My mother would have loved you," he said quietly. "She always told me to find someone with a healer's heart, not just a surgeon's hands." The mention of his mother, the nurse who had raised him alone, touched something deep in Zariah's heart. She squeezed his hand gently. "What happens now?" she asked, acutely aware of where they were, a scrub room in a hospital where rumors already swirled about them. "That depends on you," Elias said. "I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere away from the hospital, somewhere we can talk without surgical masks and prying eyes." "People will talk," Zariah warned, though she couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. "Nurse Manager Jenkins will have a field day." "Let them talk," Elias said with a shrug. "I'm not asking you to break any rules. I'm just asking for a chance to know you outside these walls." The simplicity of the request, the sincerity in his eyes, made Zariah's resistance crumble. "Okay," she said. "Dinner." The smile that lit up Elias's face transformed him completely. Gone was the cold, distant surgeon. In his place was a man whose joy was almost boyish in its intensity. "Tomorrow night?" he asked hopefully. "After your shift?" Before Zariah could answer, the door to the scrub room burst open. Nurse Manager Jenkins stood there, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of them standing close together, hands still joined. "Nurse Mills," she said coldly, "I need to speak with you." Immediately, Elias straightened, his expression hardening. "Actually, Nurse Manager Jenkins, I was just discussing tomorrow's procedure with Nurse Mills. It's quite complex and requires detailed preparation." Jenkins looked unconvinced. "This can't wait, Dr. Ward. Hospital policy matters can't be postponed for surgical discussions." What hospital policy are we violating exactly? Elias asked, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in the OR. As far as I'm aware, there's no rule against colleagues having a professional conversation. Jenkins flushed. There are concerns about inappropriate relationships. Based on what evidence? Elias pressed. Has anyone witnessed anything inappropriate? Or is this hospital now in the business of policing unfounded gossip? Zariah had never seen anyone stand up to Jenkins like this before. The nurse manager seemed at a loss for words. I have nothing but the highest professional respect for Nurse Mills, Elias continued. Her work in the OR today saved our patient's life. If anyone should be questioned about their professional conduct, it should be whoever is spreading rumors, instead of focusing on patient care. Jenkins's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Well, nevertheless, proper boundaries must be maintained. I couldn't agree more, Elias said smoothly. Now if you'll excuse us, we need to check on our post-op patient. He guided Zariah past the stunned nurse manager and into the hall. Once they were out of earshot, Zariah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did, Elias replied, his voice equally low. This is exactly what I was afraid of, you being targeted while I remain untouchable. It's not fair, and I won't stand for it. The protective edge in his voice warmed Zariah even as it concerned her. I can fight my own battles, you know. I know you can, he said with a small smile, but you shouldn't have to fight this one alone, not when I'm partly responsible for it. They reached the recovery room where their patient was resting. Through the window they could see her vital signs on the monitor. Stable, strong. We make a good team, Zariah said softly. The best, Elias agreed. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. Tomorrow night. My address is on there. I'll cook dinner. You cook? Zariah asked, surprised. A hint of mischief glinted in his grey eyes. There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Nurse Mills. With that, he walked away, leaving Zariah holding the note and fighting a smile that threatened to overtake her entire face. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Zariah unfolded the note again. Beneath Elias's address and phone number was a brief message. You asked me to stop hiding. I'm standing here now. No more secrets, no more anonymity. Just me, hoping you'll give us a chance. It was signed simply, Elias. For the first time in 3 years, Zariah allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. Someone who wouldn't disappear when things got difficult. She traced her fingers over his signature. The first time he'd ever signed a note to her. It felt like a promise, a beginning. She reached for her phone and typed a quick message to the number he'd provided. What time tomorrow, and should I bring wine? The response came almost immediately. 7, and just bring yourself. That's all I need. Zariah hugged the phone to her chest, feeling like a teenager with her first crush instead of a 29-year-old woman who'd sworn off relationships. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Dr. Elias Ward had already broken through her carefully constructed walls with nothing more than handwritten notes and sincere words. The next day at the hospital, Zariah felt like she was walking on air, despite the exhaustion of her shift. Even Nurse Jenkins's disapproving glares couldn't dampen her spirits. What's got you so chipper? Tanya asked as they checked inventory in the supply room. Nothing, Zariah said, trying and failing to hide her smile. Uh-huh. Nothing has a name, and it starts with Doctor and ends with Ward, Tanya teased. Then, more seriously, just be careful, okay? Men like him are more complicated than they seem, Zariah finished for her. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. But did she? As her shift drew to a close and the reality of having dinner at Elias's home loomed closer, doubts began to creep in. They came from different worlds. The hospital gossip mill was already working overtime, and Zariah had been hurt before by men who seemed sincere at first. As she changed out of her scrubs, she almost talked herself out of going. It would be easier to text him with an excuse, to retreat back behind her safe walls where no one could hurt her. Then she remembered his words in the scrub room. I see you, Zariah, really seeing you. And she remembered her own response to his notes. If you see me, truly see me, then stop hiding. It was time for her to stop hiding too. She took extra care with her appearance that evening, choosing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes and letting her hair down from its usual practical bun. As she stood in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her, a woman with hope in her eyes and color in her cheeks. At precisely 6:55 p.m., she pulled up to the address Elias had given her. She'd expected an upscale apartment building or maybe a sleek modern house. Instead, she found herself in front of a modest brick townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't what she'd imagined for a surgeon from a wealthy family, but somehow it fit the Elias she was getting to know, the man behind the cold exterior. Before she could even ring the bell, the door opened. Elias stood there in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The smile that spread across his face when he saw her made her heart flip in her chest. "You came," he said, as if he'd been half expecting her to change her mind. "I came," Zariah confirmed, returning his smile, "and I brought wine anyway." She held up the bottle she'd picked up on the way. "Then you'd better come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Dinner's almost ready." As she stepped across the threshold, Zariah knew she was crossing more than just a physical boundary. She was stepping into something new, something frightening and wonderful all at once, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to see where it might lead. The inside of Elias's home was a revelation. Zariah had expected something sleek and impersonal, a bachelor pad designed to impress. Instead, she found herself in a warm, lived-in space filled with books and comfortable furniture. The walls were lined with bookshelves and family photos dotted the surfaces. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted, as she followed him into the kitchen, where amazing smells were coming from the oven. "Let me guess," Elias said with a wry smile. "How you thought it would be all chrome and glass with modern art no one actually likes." Zariah laughed. "Something like that. That's my father's taste, not mine." He handed her a glass of wine. "I prefer places that feel like homes, not showrooms." The kitchen was clearly a space he used often. Well-worn cookbooks lined a small shelf, and the pots and pans hanging from a rack showed signs of regular use. "You really do cook," Zariah said, watching as he moved confidently around the kitchen, checking something in the oven that smelled like heaven. "My mother taught me," he explained, stirring a sauce on the stove. "She said no son of hers was going to grow up helpless in a kitchen." "Tell me about her," Zariah said, perching on a stool at the counter. "Your mother." Elias's face softened. "Her name was Eleanor. She worked as a nurse for 35 years, most of that time raising me alone after my father left when I was 8. He paused, adding herbs to the sauce. "She was the strongest person I've ever known. Worked night shifts so she could be home when I got back from school, put herself through a master's program while working full-time, never complained even when things were tight." "She sounds amazing," Zariah said softly. "She was." Elias looked up, meeting Zariah's eyes. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in spirit. That same quiet strength, that refusal to be less than who you are." The comparison to the woman who had clearly meant everything to Elias touched Zariah deeply. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Elias said with certainty. "She always told me to find someone real, not someone who wanted me for my family name or bank account." "Is that a problem you have often?" Zariah asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the flutter in her stomach at the implication that he was finding someone. Elias laughed, but there was little humor in it. "You'd be surprised. The Ward name opens a lot of doors in this city. My father's family has been in medicine for generations. There's a wing at Johns Hopkins named after my grandfather." "That must be a lot to live up to," Zariah observed. "It was," he agreed, taking the dish from the oven, some kind of pasta bake that made Zariah's mouth water. "For years I tried to be what my father wanted, the perfect Ward heir, cold and brilliant and focused only on prestige. I thought if I became that person, maybe he'd—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Maybe he'd come back?" Zariah finished gently. Elias nodded, not meeting her eyes as he served the food onto plates. "Stupid, right? Chasing the approval of someone who walked away." "Not stupid," Zariah said. "Human." They moved to a small dining table set with candles and cloth napkins. As they ate, the food was delicious, some kind of gourmet pasta dish with flavors Zariah couldn't even identify. The conversation flowed easily between them. Zariah told him about growing up in Baltimore with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. About how the nurses at the hospital had been so kind to her during that time that she decided to become one herself. "So we're both in medicine because of strong women who raised us," Elias observed. "Seems that way," Zariah agreed with a smile. "Though I bet your mother had bigger dreams for you than mine did for me. My grandma just wanted me to have a steady job with benefits." "And what did you want?" Elias asked, his eyes intent on her face. The question caught Zariah off guard. What do you mean? I mean, if there were no expectations, no practical considerations, what would you have chosen for yourself? Zariah thought about it, swirling the wine in her glass. I don't know, she said honestly. I love nursing. I love making a difference in people's lives when they're at their most vulnerable, but sometimes I wonder what? If I could have done more, she admitted. Maybe gone to medical school, become a doctor, or gotten a PhD. In nursing, done research, taught others. She shrugged, but life had other plans. My grandma got sick my senior year of high school. We needed money, so I went for the quickest path that would let me support us both. It's not too late, you know, Elias said. For any of those things. Zariah smiled sadly. Maybe in another life, the one where I don't have student loans and a mortgage. What if there was a way? Elias leaned forward, an intensity in his expression that Zariah recognized from the operating room. What if money wasn't an obstacle? Then I'd probably get my master's in nursing education, Zariah said. Help train the next generation of nurses who actually care about patients, not just paychecks. She narrowed her eyes at him. Why? Are you offering to be my sugar daddy? She meant it as a joke, but the moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. To her relief, Elias laughed. No, nothing like that. I just believe in investing in talent, in people who make a difference. He reached across the table, taking her hand. People like you. The moment was charged with something Zariah couldn't quite define. Possibility, perhaps. The feeling that doors she'd thought permanently closed might still be open after all. After dinner, they moved to the living room with their wine. Elias built a small fire in the fireplace, and they sat side by side on the comfortable couch, talking about everything and nothing. Favorite books, worst hospital stories, places they'd like to travel someday. It was the most natural thing in the world, when Elias's arm found its way around her shoulders, when Zariah leaned into his warmth, when the conversation eventually faded into comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. I've been thinking about my notes, Elias said after a while, his voice soft in the dimly lit room, about why I wrote them instead of just talking to you. And, Zariah prompted, looking up at him, I think I was afraid, he admitted, not just of rejection, but of not being able to find the right words in the moment. When I write, I can say exactly what I mean. Face to face, I've spent so many years hiding behind this professional mask that sometimes I don't know how to take it off. You're doing pretty well right now, Zariah said with a small smile. Elias's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Only because it's you, he said softly. You make me want to be real in a way I haven't been in a very long time. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question more than a demand. Zariah answered by leaning into it, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was a beginning, wrapped in the warmth of firelight and honesty. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery and adjustment. At the hospital, they maintained a professional relationship, though it was harder now to hide the connection between them. Zariah would catch Elias watching her across rooms, his usually stern expression softening when their eyes met. She would find small notes tucked into her locker or her scrub pocket, no longer anonymous but signed simply with an E. Your smile across the ER today gave me strength for this difficult surgery. E. I watched you comfort Mrs. Hendricks when she got bad news. Your compassion is a gift. Outside the hospital, they built something neither had experienced before, a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. Elias cooked dinner at his place on nights when they both finished at a reasonable hour. Zariah introduced him to her favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants where the owners knew her by name. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their pasts. Elias told her about growing up with a father who saw emotions as weakness, about the pressure to uphold the Ward legacy. Zariah shared stories about her grandmother, about the struggles of being a black woman in healthcare, about the patients who had changed her life. But the gossip at the hospital didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. People are saying you got assigned to the cardiac unit because of your connection with Dr. Ward, Tanya told her one day in the cafeteria. That he pulled strings. That's ridiculous, Zariah said, stabbing at her salad with more force than necessary. I requested that rotation 6 months ago, long before Elias and I know that and you know that, Tanya said, but perception is reality in this place. The whispers followed Zariah through the halls. Some nurses who had once been friendly now gave her cold shoulders. Dr. Walker, who had always valued her assistance in surgeries, suddenly found reasons not to request her. It's not fair, Zariah fumed one night at Elias's house. I haven't changed. My work hasn't changed. But suddenly I'm either sleeping my way to the top or I'm being accused of thinking I'm too good for regular nurse duties. Elias listened, his face troubled. I'm sorry, he said when she finished. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen, that you'd pay a price for being with me while I remain untouched. It's not your fault, Zariah sighed, leaning against him on the couch. It's just how the world works. A successful black woman must have had help, right? She couldn't possibly have earned her place. What can I do? Elias asked, his arm tightening around her. Tell me how to fix this. Zariah looked up at him, touched by his desire to make things better. You can't fix society in a day, Elias. This is just something I have to weather. But the situation came to a head a week later when Zariah was called into the chief of nursing's office. The chief, Dr. Patricia Morgan, was a stern woman in her 60s who had worked her way up through the ranks over 40 years at Baltimore Memorial. Nurse Mills, she said, as Zariah took a seat across from her desk, I'm hearing concerning reports about your professional conduct. Zariah sat up straighter. My professional conduct has been exemplary, Dr. Morgan. If you check my record, your clinical skills are not in question, Dr. Morgan interrupted. It's your relationship with Dr. Ward that concerns me. My personal life is separate from my work, Zariah said firmly. It has never affected my patient care or my duties. Be that as it may, there are concerns about favoritism, about special treatment. Dr. Morgan shuffled some papers on her desk. Several staff members have complained that you're receiving preferential assignments because of your association with Dr. Ward. That's absolutely false, Zariah said, struggling to keep her voice level. Any assignments I've received have been based on my qualifications and experience. Nevertheless, perceptions matter in a hospital environment. Dr. Morgan's words echoed what Nurse Jenkins had said weeks before. I'm recommending your transfer to our sister facility in Towson, a fresh start away from distractions. Zariah felt as if she'd been slapped. You're punishing me for having a relationship outside of work. Is that even legal? It's not a punishment, Nurse Mills. It's a solution to a situation that's becoming disruptive to the functioning of this hospital. And has Dr. Ward been offered a similar solution? Zariah asked, already knowing the answer. Dr. Morgan had the grace to look uncomfortable. Dr. Ward's position is different because he's a surgeon, because he's a man, or because his family name is on the donor's wall. Zariah stood up, her hands shaking with anger. This is discrimination, plain and simple. Sit down, Nurse Mills, Doctor, Morgan said sharply. This attitude is exactly the problem. No, the problem is that this hospital would rather transfer a dedicated nurse than address the real issues, gossip, bias, and outdated policies. Zariah picked up her badge and placed it on the desk. I'll save you the trouble of the transfer paperwork. I quit. She walked out of the office with her head held high, ignoring Dr. Morgan's calls for her to come back. It wasn't until she reached the empty stairwell that the tears came, hot and angry down her cheeks. She hadn't meant to quit. She loved her job, loved her patients. But the injustice of it all, being punished for finding happiness while Elias remained untouchable, was too much to bear. Zariah avoided the nurse's station and the locker room, not wanting to face questions or worse, pity. She took the back stairs down to the parking garage, just wanting to get to her car and go home. She was so focused on holding herself together that she didn't notice Elias until he called her name. Zariah, what's wrong? He was coming from the opposite direction, concern immediately flooding his face when he saw her tears. Nothing, she said automatically, wiping at her cheeks. Just a bad day. Elias stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. Don't do that. Not with me. What happened? The genuine worry in his voice broke through the last of her defenses. I quit, she said, her voice cracking. They wanted to transfer me to Towson because of us, because of perceptions and concerns about favoritism. Anger flashed across Elias's face, followed quickly by guilt. This is my fault. No, Zariah said firmly, despite her tears. It's the system's fault. A system that punishes women, especially black women, for stepping out of the boxes they're supposed to stay in. Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she finally let herself cry properly. I'm so sorry, he murmured into her hair. You love this job, these patients. I do, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. But I couldn't stay where I wasn't respected, where my work wasn't valued because people were too busy gossiping about my personal life. Elias was quiet for a long moment, just holding her. Then he pulled back slightly, looking down at her with determination in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "Trust me." The next day, Zariah woke to find Elias already gone from the bed they'd shared for the first time the night before. There was a note on the pillow, "Gone to fix what should never have been broken. Trust me. I'll call you later. Love, E. Love." The word made Zariah's heart skip, even as she wondered what Elias was planning. She spent the day in a daze, alternating between regret over her impulsive resignation and anger at the unfairness that had pushed her to it. Late that afternoon, her phone rang with Elias's number. "Can you meet me at the hospital?" he asked without preamble. "In the main conference room, 4th floor. "Elias, I don't think—" "Please," he interrupted. "Just trust me, Zariah. This is important." Something in his voice convinced her. An hour later, dressed in civilian clothes that felt strange after years of wearing scrubs to the hospital, Zariah made her way to the 4th floor conference room. What she found there stopped her in her tracks. The large room was filled with people, nurses, doctors, administrators. Dr. Morgan was there looking uncomfortable. Nurse Jenkins stood near the back, arms crossed defensively. Even the hospital CEO, a man Zariah had only seen at annual staff meetings, sat at the head of the table. And at the center of it all stood Elias, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. "Ah, Nurse Mills," the CEO said when he spotted her hovering in the doorway. "Please join us." Dr. Ward was just explaining his proposal. Confused, and more than a little wary, Zariah took a seat near the door, ready to make a quick exit if necessary. Elias caught her eye and gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning back to the group. "As I was saying," he continued, "this situation has exposed a significant flaw in our hospital's culture, a culture that values certain staff over others based not on merit, but on title and status." The room was uncomfortably silent as Elias continued. "Nurse Zariah Mills has been one of this hospital's most valuable assets for 7 years. Her clinical skills are exceptional. Her patient care is exemplary. Yet when rumors began about our personal relationship, it was Nurse Mills who faced scrutiny, who was questioned, who was ultimately pushed to resign rather than transfer to a facility far from her home and the patients she cares for." Zariah felt her cheeks warm as every eye in the room turned to her. "This is not an isolated incident," Elias went on, his voice gaining strength. "It's part of a pattern that affects nurses, particularly women of color, throughout our healthcare system. A pattern that needs to change." He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward the CEO. "This is a proposal for a new initiative at Baltimore Memorial, the Eleanor Ward Nursing Excellence Program, named after my late mother, who was a nurse for 35 years. Zariah's breath caught in her throat at the mention of Elias's mother. "The program has 3 components," Elias explained. "First, a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses from underrepresented communities in Baltimore. Second, a career advancement pathway that provides financial support for current nurses seeking advanced degrees. And third, a complete revision of the hospital's outdated policies regarding workplace relationships, policies that disproportionately impact women and minorities." The CEO opened the folder, scanning the documents inside with raised eyebrows. "This is comprehensive, Dr. Ward. And the funding. I'm personally providing the initial endowment of $2 million, Elias said calmly, ignoring the gasps that rippled through the room. "And the Ward Family Foundation will match that amount annually for the next 10 years. Zariah stared at Elias in disbelief. This was what he'd been doing all day? Creating a multi-million-dollar program because she'd been treated unfairly. "This is very generous, Dr. Ward," the CEO said carefully. "But I'm not sure how it addresses the immediate situation with Nurse Mills." "I'm getting to that," Elias said. "I'm proposing that Nurse Mills be offered her position back, with a formal apology for the discriminatory treatment she received. Furthermore, I recommend she be appointed as the first director of the Eleanor Ward program, overseeing the scholarship recipients and mentoring program." Now all eyes were definitely on Zariah, who felt as if she'd stepped into an alternate reality. This couldn't be happening. "And what about your personal relationship?" Dr. Morgan asked, speaking for the first time. "That doesn't simply disappear because of a new program." "No, it doesn't," Elias agreed, "which is why the policy revisions are so important. Zariah and I are not the first people to find a connection while working in the same hospital, and we won't be the last. The issue isn't relationships, it's how they're handled. Transparent disclosure, recusal from direct supervisory roles, clear guidelines that apply equally to everyone, regardless of their position or background." The discussion continued for another hour, details of the program, questions about implementation, concerns about precedent. Throughout it all, Elias remained steady, answering each question with thoughtful consideration. Not once did he waver in his conviction that change was necessary, that what had happened to Zariah was wrong. Finally, the CEO closed the folder and looked around the room. I think we have a path forward here. Dr. Ward's proposal has merit, and frankly, the financial commitment is substantial enough to warrant serious consideration. He turned to Zariah. Nurse Mills, would you be willing to withdraw your resignation and consider the position Dr. Ward has suggested? All eyes were on her again. Zariah took a deep breath. I would need to review the details of the position, she said carefully. And I would want assurances that what happened to me won't happen to other nurses in the future. Fair enough, the CEO nodded. We'll have HR draw up a formal offer and policy revisions for your review. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Ward, Nurse Mills, if you could stay behind for a moment. As the room emptied, Zariah remained in her chair, still trying to process everything that had happened. Once they were alone with the CEO, he looked between them with a measured expression. Off the record, he said, this situation was handled poorly from the start. Dr. Ward is right. There's a double standard at play here that needs to be addressed. He turned to Zariah. I hope you'll consider coming back, Nurse Mills. From everything I've heard, you're exactly the kind of healthcare professional we need more of, not less. With that, he gathered his papers and left, closing the door behind him. The moment they were alone, Zariah turned to Elias. What did you just do? Elias moved to her side, taking her hands in his. I did what should have been done a long time ago, used my privilege for something that matters. A scholarship program named after your mother, millions of dollars. Zariah shook her head in disbelief. All because I quit my job? No, Elias said softly. Because you showed me what real courage looks like. Because you refused to be treated as less than you are. He squeezed her hands. And because I love you, Zariah Mills. The words, spoken so simply, so directly, took her breath away. You love me? I do, he said, a smile spreading across his face. I think I have since the first time I saw you standing up for a patient against that arrogant specialist from Johns Hopkins. You were fierce and compassionate and absolutely unwilling to back down. His expression softened. You reminded me of everything I wanted to be, but had forgotten how. Zariah felt tears prick at her eyes again, but these were different from yesterday's. I love you too, she whispered. But Elias, you didn't have to do all this, create a whole program, spend millions of dollars. I didn't do it just for you, he said. Though you were the catalyst. I did it for my mother, who worked herself to the bone for decades with too little recognition. I did it for all the nurses who deserve better than they get. And yes, I did it for us, because I want to build something that matters with you, Zariah. Something that lasts. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the same thick, expensive paper he'd used for all his anonymous notes. He handed it to her. What's this? She asked. The last note, he said simply. But this one doesn't need to be anonymous. Zariah unfolded it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple message. You changed me with your care, long before you knew I needed it. This time, I want to be the one holding your heart steady. It was signed. Yours always, Elias. Zariah looked up at him, at this man who had gone from cold surgeon to her most passionate advocate, who had seen her when others looked past her, who had written his heart in ink before he found the courage to speak it aloud. So, she said, blinking back tears, does this mean I get to boss around a bunch of nursing students and make them do everything by the book? Elias laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. It means you get to shape the next generation of nurses who will care as much as you do, who will fight as hard as you do. And us? Zariah asked, suddenly serious again. People will still talk. Let them, Elias said firmly. As long as the policies are fair, as long as we're transparent about our relationship, they can talk all they want. He pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her waist. All that matters is what's real between us. Zariah reached up, touching his face gently. And what is real, Dr. Ward? His smile was softer than anyone at the hospital would have believed possible on that usually stern face. Everything, he said simply. Everything about you, about us, is the most real thing I've ever known. When he kissed her, right there in the conference room where hospital policy had just been rewritten, Zariah didn't care who might see, who might talk. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly valued, not just as a nurse, not just as a woman, but as herself. In the months that followed, The Eleanor Ward Nursing Excellence Program took shape. Zariah threw herself into the work, helping select the first group of scholarship recipients, mentoring young nurses, advocating for policy changes that would benefit everyone, not just those with power and privilege. Elias continued his surgical work, but something in him had changed. The cold, distant doctor was gone, replaced by a man who took time to learn the names of the cleaning staff, who sat with nervous patients before surgery, who taught residents with patience instead of intimidation. Together, they were changing Baltimore Memorial from the inside out, a surgeon and a nurse, breaking down barriers that had stood for generations. And if people still whispered when they saw them together in the hospital corridors, neither of them cared anymore. They knew the truth of what they'd built together, what they continued to build each day. 1 year to the day after Zariah found the first anonymous note in her locker, she opened her desk drawer in her new office to find another folded piece of paper. Inside was a simple question: "Will you marry me?" This time, when she looked up, Elias was already there, watching her with love in his eyes and a small velvet box in his hand. Zariah smiled through happy tears. Some questions didn't need to be answered with words. Some love stories began in silence, with words on paper that no one else would see. But the best ones, like theirs, grew into something that couldn't be contained by paper or ink, something that had to be lived day by day, heart to heart, something real, something lasting, something they had both been waiting for all their lives.